had, and now I think that was a man and it wasn't a student at all.
Gotcha.
I think he was in, I just think that. So this is the reason that it sounds a little convoluted. So all of a sudden I started wondering about this counselor, because he used to do things like he would send us into the younger schools to tutor these kids, and he was teaching us something called behavior modification, which I thought was interesting. Come to find out, behavior modification is MK Ultra speak. And the other day, maybe 2 months ago, I started wondering about this guy. I remembered he took me to a dentist on a Sunday when my parents weren't home, and they put me under so deeply that I still don't have any recollection of what might have gone on there. I was under for hours.
Well, let me stop you a couple of things here. First of all, now, when you were all dosed with this LSD, like the next day or the week after, did anybody talk to each other and said, hey, man, what happened that day when we were dosed?
No, because we had all made the purchase. We all purchased it.
Okay, so everyone...
It was like $1 a hit.
Okay, and then with the dentist, he just picked you up at your house. Did your parents know he was picking you up to take you to the dentist, or he just picked you up and took you to a dentist?
He just picked me up and took me to the dentist. I called him. I said, my tooth hurts. And he said, I'll be right over.
Okay.
By that time, because he was so in our lives, he was so intertwined at this point. Everybody, by that time I had already been out to his house for the weekend. And when we were coming home from the dentist, we're riding back, and I was like really just coming down from massive dose of laughing gas. I mean, nobody would ever give anybody that dose ever again. And he put his hand on my lap and he gave me one of those looks that at that time, I was pretty aware of what men wanted from me. And I just said, I'm kind of sick and kind of weirded out from this day. I can't. And he realized it was the first time I had actually turned down a man.
Mm-hmm.
I was just weirded out because he was too much part father, part teacher, he was too involved in my life for me to let him use me that way.
Okay, a couple of questions for you. How old were you then?
I was 14.
14. Okay, and again...
I was very jaded by then.
Right, and again, your parents, they had met this guy, and they were all fine with this?
They loved him, and the world loved this man.
Okay.
So I looked this man up on the internet just not long ago, just to see, because I knew that he would have passed away by now. And then I thought, I wonder where he went to college.
Mm.
And I wish I'd written these down for you, Ed, because it's easy for me to get, and I could send it to you anytime. I looked at his obit, and he said, well, he'd gone to college to get some degree over in New Haven. And there was a weird little thing about that, but I wouldn't bother getting into that, because the other one, he was in a college, and I believe he wasn't at Cornell University. He was in a smaller college, and he was getting his psychology degree. And the man that was the head of that department was the man that wrote The Manchurian Candidate and invented The Manchurian Candidate, and told anybody that would listen that give him 40 minutes with any man and he'll split his personality. And then I started thinking about the other things that had happened, and I started thinking about going to the dentist and the acid test, right. And we also all belong to this really crazy club called, I can't tell you the name of it because it's the hospital. It was the call letters for a really dark mental institution.
Let me stop you 1 second there.
Every week.
Let me stop you 1 second. Now, you're saying that this school counselor went to college, and his instructor, his professor at that college, was the guy who came up with the Manchurian Candidate screenplay?
Yes.
Okay.
Well, he was the one that invented the whole concept.
Okay.
It's a real thing.
No, sure. Okay.
That he invented.
So then, now you're about 14 years old now. What's the next big event?
Okay. So, like I said, we go to this mental institution every Wednesday night. Carloads of us kids get school credit to go to this mental institution. We get totally baked and, go hang out with them. And sometimes we'd go on locked wards. And I would see these interesting things that I didn't really, like you walk into a bathroom and there's a woman standing there with no clothes on, crying in the sink. And it's like, okay, I've smoked too much pot. I got to get out of here.
Okay, let me stop you right there.
It was a club.
Let me stop you right there. Now, you're about 15 years old now, and you're smoking pot like in the car?
No, I'm 14 still.
14, and you're smoking pot?
I've been smoking pot since I was about 12, and I picked that up in school, yeah.
But I'm talking about when you go into this mental institution, you're smoking pot in the bus on the way over, or how is that happening?
Well, we had cars. It was two cars. It was just, there was no chaperones. We got credit to go out there for, every week.
Okay, hold on a second.
And it turned out my sister had gone there too.
Right, hold on a
second. She did the same thing. We all went there and got him.
Right. Now you're saying that there was no teachers taking you there. This was a school club.
No.
And on your own at 14 years old, you would just go down and knock on the door and say, "Here we are"?
Yeah.
Okay.
We were walking in and, sign in and go. It's like one of those really old hospitals, like off a horror movie. So
Sure.
It was bizarre. And we were like I said, we were all pretty tranquilized on marijuana. And so it made things even more interesting,
Now,
and
was
it
anybody,
turned out my friend,
were there any doctors or professionals there that were supervising you and taking you around, or just you had the run of the place?
I believe that you would see orderlies and nurses, but everyone stayed out of our way. We just sort of went and interacted, had Coke, sang pong, talked about the best drugs we could take and what they were taking. I mean, it was really so, I just remember, sometimes we would take them off campus to parties and stuff.
You would take the patients off campus.
Yeah. Sometimes we would just walk out the doors and go outside and smoke a joint.
All right.
It was just, and none of this makes any sense because I know the way the world works now, and I know that people aren't allowed to behave that way. So that's what I was like, wait a minute. Anyway.
Things were different in the 70s for sure.
So,
things were different back in the 70s for sure.
Well, that's true.
Yeah, things were way different.
So I was, so I was very restless. I was having a really bad time of it. And I wasn't going to return to that high school for a number of reasons. And so I started running away, and this was like mid-term. Like as soon as the snow thawed, I took off to like Rhode Island. I just leaving because I needed to I couldn't be, I knew there was something wrong where I was coming from, and I still couldn't put my finger on it, but I was never more anxious and unhappy in my life. And I felt misunderstood. I don't know. I just wanted to end. Finally, like the third time when I was away, I got psyched that I should call one of the counselors at Touch. I shouldn't even say, well, you can't find that online anyway. So I called one of the counselors, and she sort of talked me back in from my runaway place, but I didn't go home. I went to live someplace else for the summer, to some other people's house. And while I was there, she arranged for me to go to the Hill.
Which was that private school?
And the Hill gave that private school, and the Hill gave me a scholarship, and I flunked ninth grade. I didn't go. I only went halfway. So I'm like, okay, so all this time I'm like, well, they gave me a scholarship. I'm thinking, for what?
Did you think maybe they were giving you a scholarship because you were a troubled kid?
Well, everyone was troubled up there. There were 20 students. It was sort of a farm hippie commune.
This is the Hill.
And yeah.
Okay.
And so I would tell you really truly that every single kid up there came to there traumatized.
Okay.
From something. And the reason that I get a lump in my throat when I talk about it because it was the first safe place I was. Mm-hmm. There was nobody, there was sex happening, but there was nothing, I didn't feel like I was being exploited every turn I took. And, they just let us be. There weren't the judgments because, schools, you know how it is in high school. Everyone's trying to get on top of each other, and so that wasn't there. So that was a big relief to me too.
Okay,
we sort of were.
Let me stop you right there. You're saying sex was happening. Was this with the faculty and the teachers and the students, or just amongst the students?
Sort of. Well, I wince when I say this is the way that I will present it to you, and this is why I'm only using my name because there's people alive and I don't want to hurt them.
Okay.
But first of all, we were right off the sexual revolution. So people still hadn't sort of made their way what was kosher and what could be discarded and what didn't need to be discarded.
Right.
When I look back, at first I remember, I slept with a lot of staff members. But I was, by that time I was incredibly promiscuous because I had been, acculturated to be that way from very early on, from like age 4 up. So I really didn't. And the reason, and they let the students be sexual because basically everybody there had been so sexually traumatized. You can't bring a kid in at age 16 been there and then tell them they can't do that anymore. I mean, you just can't.
Now you're saying at age 4 up. What happened to you at age 4? Was that a relative, a family member?
I was molested. It wasn't a relative. It was men in town. There was a lot of men in town, and they all found their way to me and some of the others.
Okay. How did they get access to you?
There's an inordinate amount of pedophiles in the particular town I'm from, which makes me think that there is a scene there, you know?
And how did they get access to you? Were your parents aware that these men had access to you?
You know, the first time it happened, it went on for about 3 years, and it got so bad by age 7 because I couldn't even. We're supposed to go to church and get confess before we got our first confession, and by that time I hadn't slept in like 6 months, and age 7 and 6, I was getting up and heating up some milk in the middle of the night because I just couldn't sleep, and I had no one to turn to. I didn't know what to say, and so finally I told my mother one day when I was getting in the bath what happened, and at first she was really cool about it. For the first week, she was like, "You don't have to talk about that. You don't have to deal with that. I don't want to." But for whatever reason, whatever trauma she had been through in her life, I don't know, but she turned it around on me, and I was separated. I had to go to a different church because she didn't want me to shame the family by telling the pastor that. Why I would have to tell the pastor that. Nobody ever said, like, that wasn't a sin. You didn't do nothing. So I went to a different church for my family, and so I wasn't Catholic anymore, and
Wait. Let me stop you right there. Because it's your assumption that the reason why she sent you to a different church is not to shame the family. There could have been other motivations on her part, correct?
Well, she kept on telling me that I could tell the guy. She's like, oh, it's just like, and that's when she told me that you could tell the guy, and the way she described how it would go and what I would say was one of those little red flags that planted in my brain, like, what does this mean? And then later, when I was an adult, I realized that she had gone through the same thing, and she was saying, oh, no, you just go tell him and it'll be all right.
Okay, and you didn't go to the Catholic church any longer. You went to what kind of church after that?
No. First, I started out at a Protestant church, and then I think I ended up in Episcopalian.
Okay. Did you ever tell anybody? Did you ever confess to anybody what was going on?
I only told my mother that one time, and then she was like, she called the guy's wife, and she said he's going to jail anyway, and don't even bother. And I never saw him again.
Okay, let's go back.
Kill himself.
Let's go back to the Hill, right? Now, was this a boarding school type thing, or you would go there and go?
Yes.
Boarding school. You lived there.
Yes, you would go out in the middle of the woods and you would build your own little teeny cabin, and they'd bring in a really expensive wood stove and a load of firewood, and there's a house, and so you lived in the woods, and then you would go up to the main building to meet and have meals and hang out and make music.
And this was all.
It was like
all troubled kids, though.
Yeah. Well, and the truth is there may have been some that weren't, like, that were just really smart or really didn't fit. Like the whole tone, even when I go up now and I talk to, it's not a school anymore, it's something else now. And when I talk to them, I say, oh yeah, we were all a poor fit for regular school. And that's how we build it. We were just a bad fit. But now that I look at it, I'm thinking that it was something else. And for a while there, I was trying to say that it was a rescue operation because that's what I thought it was. But when I tried to meet with people that had either staffed it or been students there, they sort of said, no, that wasn't it at all. You're missing the point. It was supposed to be an experimental school based on Summerhill. Well, I look back, and there's a lot of foster kids there. And I mean, they were fostered by the school.
Right. Now, let me ask you a question.
There was a lot of state-sponsored. Yeah.
How was the school funded?
Well, so there were a handful of students that came from really wealthy, liberal families, and they paid full boat.
Okay.
And then there were students like me that were on partial tuition. Father had a disability check for me that was like $75 a month. And so that would feed me at my house, and since I was out of that house, my mother said that they could have it. And I forget, but it was more than that. It was maybe $2.25 a month or something for tuition. But so there's some of us on partial scholarship, right, and some of us that were full boat and funded by the state.
Now let me stop you right there.
The state would.
Right, you were receiving a disability check for what type of disability did you have?
I didn't. My dad was.
Your dad had a disability.
I got his disability. when you have children, you get an extra check
Sure.
if you're on disability.
I understand. What was your dad's disability?